Hello, fellow warriors. I'd like to use some time and capitalize a bit on the debate that is going on the question, what is HEMA? And this is not directly the response to either Scalagrims or Scholar Gladiatoria, Shadiversities, or even Scholar General videos. It's just I see that there's a debate going on, and I want to put some of my insights and even actually make an attempt to draw wider conclusions and show a bigger picture on what is going on with historical martial arts as compared to modern martial arts that we have. So first of all, the debate on the question what is HEMA is actually the debate on claiming the name. So this means that HEMA, as an acronym for Historical European Martial Arts, but standalone by itself, HEMA, as you would say, a trademark, a brand even, is already quite prominent. It gained traction and has already value and followers. So therefore, the question, in fact, is not what is historical, what is not, but what do we actually call HEMA, and do we still keep calling HEMA what it was, or does it actually have to grow beyond that? So I completely understand the debate. Now, I'd like to add some insights to that, because it's in fact not only the debate what is HEMA, what is not, but generally what are historical approaches to martial arts, and even geographical approaches to martial arts as well. So first of all, revisiting what is historical, meaning what are the sources used to reconstruct and learn and practice historical martial arts. So this comes back to the science or the field of history and the historical investigation. So generally in every field of historical investigation, you could find a debate what sources are more reliable or bring more information to the table, so to speak. Are these written sources or archaeological sources, generally material evidence? And of course, we know that it's some interplay between both of these, but still, when there are two pillars, you will always find a debate which one at the certain moment provides more information. So the debate on what is HEMA is not anything detached from the debate what is historical source. And if you consider history being written history and everything that is before that being generally archaeology, the realm of archaeology, then yes. So if we use the word in that sense, historical meaning written history, then of course we have to investigate only written sources, and then everything else should be called maybe, I know, archaeological European martial arts, something, no, I don't know. But if we expand the field of history or historical research, and understand the way as actually Shad presented in his video, that way to investigate history is not only through written sources but through various other artifacts and archaeological sources, and not only artifacts, but I will also argue that even the mythology, the folklore could be considered some source of historical knowledge. So one of the approaches of experimental archaeology, or in a way experiential archaeology, is the way that it provides life to the facts and artifacts that are found. In every science, and actually in popularizing of science, we have the problem that there's only some things that we can tell with certainty, and then a lot of other things are just obscure. And this does not draw attention, does not draw interest from general public or any person. It's more interesting when you know more about how people live from these artifacts. So not the artifacts themselves, but the way what information they provide about their life is always more attractive and more gaining interest than the artifacts themselves. So therefore, the way that HEMA works and used to work is actually drawing information from the written sources in the treatises as textual description, then using images or other museum artifacts to provide and fill in the gaps of knowledge what we didn't know from the treatise. As for example, they maybe did not talk about the actual weapons themselves that much because they was like common, so we have to know what the weapons were or how they look in the images and so on. And then if that would be just that would be just historical pursuit and that's it. But what HEMA did, they went further and practicing, trying to apply these techniques, pressure test these techniques, and then having the competition to actually promote this or even test even further the techniques that they read and studied. So therefore, without the experimental part, HEMA would not have gained such a traction as it has now. So the experimental part is very, very important. And therefore, we cannot dismiss that and say, okay, that just the treatises are the most important part. And even, I don't believe that anyone in his or her right mind would say that just the treatises are important. No, but what is that we are now at such a stage in development of HEMA, or general, I would argue the general historical martial arts, that there is already enough body of evidence and body of knowledge even, that we could distinguish between two approaches, as in science, therefore in HEMA as well, more formalist approach and experimentalist approach. And they do not like contradict each other, they fulfill each other. Formalist approach says that, okay, what was learned is the base and we have to preserve it and keep it as it is, because we can lose it in any generation. And the experimentalist approach is that, okay, what else can we find out using the same very effective method that led to this success here? So these two approaches are not contradicting, and we can, if we look at the videos in discussion, you might find both examples of these approaches, and you will definitely find more of them later, because I think more will jump on this train to join in that discussion. But it's more interesting to see where can this lead us further. So what is the next step in the development of HEMA, or generally in that pursuit that HEMA took? So of course already there are some sounding arguments. Okay, can we push further and can we know more or test more about the Viking Age or the Roman Age or Greek Hellenistic or Celtic warfare? And can we use these experimental approaches to shed light, not just decipher fully, but shed light on the martial techniques, or even practice them just to get more interested in that field, in these fields or these geographical regions and periods in history? Can we use that to some extent further back in time? And even further, I would like to argue that HEMA stands for European martial arts, but the same approach can be applied to other geographies, which is already being applied due to the success of HEMA on African martial arts. We have historical African Martial Art Association. There are some concepts that they say, for example, historical Chinese martial arts or Asian martial arts, as contrasted to the modern Asian martial arts. And further, maybe Native American martial arts, reconstructing them from what we know, what were the descriptions from the contemporary sources or from themselves, or what can we find in the artifacts and so on. Can we construct something more than just a lifeless artifact in the museum? Can we do that? I believe we can. But would that still be HEMA? Would that be still historical martial arts? Or would that be something different, something next step, second step from the development that HEMA took? So, few things to consider. First of all, if we take this approach, take this path, one thing to consider is that once in a while we hear this convergent evolution term, that if their environment or conditions are the same, for example, we use the same weapons, the weapons replicate the movement, we have the same biomechanics, so we will come up with generally the same techniques, or the techniques that work will spring up from, once again, like second genesis of the techniques. And in a way that is true. We can find some things that work, especially if we carefully try to use as close as possible the instrument, the weapons that were used, because the inertia, not the weight, or not only the weight, the materials, but inertia is very important. You can have the same thing, which, for example, training with swords or blunt swords is one thing, but completely different thing is to try to train safely with impact weapons like war clubs or hammers, because they do damage not because of the edge, they do damage because of their impact force. But you cannot train with lighter ones because they have different inertia. So it is very difficult, but it's not impossible to find out the best ways, the most effective ways of using these weapons. But the question is, would that be considered as a historically accurate representation? Can I say that this is how they fought? And looking from the scientific standpoint, this is not enough information. I could argue that this might be the most likely way that they fought, the techniques that they used. This might be hypothetical way, or the hypothetical approach to the combat that they used. So nevertheless, it already draws some insight, some light on that. But we cannot claim that this is how it was. This is how it could have been. We should be very careful in using the words here. Even if we stick to the term HEMA and under that experimental branch or approach, from that, still has to be some caution stating that this is not exactly what we know. We know just part of it, which is also good. Now, another thing is that if we expand that term, especially what is being done in historical African martial arts now, and in some instances historical Chinese or Asian martial arts, is that there are living traditions. In contrast to, you could argue, European martial arts, we don't have that much of a living tradition, martial tradition, in historical European martial arts. So in historical African martial arts, there are still competitions even taking place, and the techniques and the rules that are used in these competitions date back, way back. And you can find even artifacts in the museums that are similar to those that they use, or you can imagine that since there are so many, like if you take, for example, Nguni stick fighting, there is only so much that you can do with these weapons, and therefore the best will stay in the competitive environment. The best techniques would be most prominent. So therefore, when you find these artifacts in the museum, you could say that, okay, at least best warriors might most likely use the same techniques there as well. So living traditions could be considered as additional resource, historical resource, to investigate the historical aspect of martial arts. Not just taking them for granted as it is in modern martial arts. We say, okay, this is what it is, and we learn that and build on top of this. But looking at these traditions to say, okay, can we figure out how it derived to this technique? What was the history of that technique? And what could be the proto-technique that might have been used in historical form of that martial art? And living traditions, if, of course, we are talking about martial arts, so we have sports or competitions that are still present, but they're very similar to folklore, like myths and legends and tales and songs and so on, which also provide some information about historical events or historical personalities. Of course, not in the real light, but in some secondary source light, but still it is. So once again, if we're not using HEMA as a word, historical European martial arts, or archaeological European martial arts, or generally, maybe you can use folklore European martial arts, or sorry, for European we cannot because we don't have a tradition, but folklore African martial arts. But then you imagine we get a bunch of terms and we have to juggle them around, but still having the same concept, the central concept that there is a historical source, then there is a practice, then there is pressure testing and competition, and all of these work together to get closer to the truth. So the core is the same, but we have different terms for the same thing. So would that be reasonable to have different term for the same approach, just having different letter in that name, denoting different location or different even not noting the time period? Saying historical means that it's just before what? Before what date is it already considered historical? 1950s? 1918 something? No? So therefore, I would suggest that we could stick to the historical martial art concept, but having different sub-branches or sub-approaches, as there is in any other martial art. There's like a cap or umbrella term, and then there are variations in, like in Japanese style, ryu. There are variations in that, and that's normal. That's what happens when you expand and you grow. We could have formal HEMA, which draws its technique from formal training or even formal treatises. Could be experiential or experimental HEMA, which draw more of a experience of learning how to fight in different scenarios, either with friends or with someone leading the group, or with some information that is drawn from folklore. So it could be also part of that, and it also would encompass these historical. The name that historical martial art would encompass other already springing up approaches to revive historical martial arts in other places of the world. So I understand the stance from those who are in favor to keeping HEMA, the term HEMA, describing as it is, with large emphasis on the treatises, because the people who've done this research and training and pressure testing and studying the resources have done a great and very, very difficult job in creating this. So of course they do not want this term to be diluted, to be a household name for everything. I completely understand their standpoint. And however this debate would be solved, or if ever, the name is not everything. So therefore, might be that HEMA would stand just for classical HEMA and everything else would be a spin-off of it. I'm fine with that. Just we have to have a different name for everything, which is already something happening. You can see on the other channels, so historical fencing and so on. So these terms spring up, and that's normal. Or it could be an umbrella term for the whole movement of experimental martial arts and having different branches of it. So to finish, the last thing I want to draw attention to is what I do, is the prehistoric martial arts. Is there any chance in this life, in this field, that we could find out, or at least have some insight or shed some light to how prehistoric people fought? And prehistory doesn't have to be like Paleolithic. It can be the same Native American warfare techniques, which are very closely related in time to European expansion, but in technology and in the way the sources were written and recorded, it's almost prehistory. So Therefore, can we find something or test something or give us more insight into Australian martial arts? Them not having bows and having parrot shield and clubs or boomerangs, how to call it. So it's different approach than, for example, when you have the cultures that had bows and different techniques. So we can see the difference and we can test that with experience. That's the only thing that we have experienced, some artifacts and a bit of pictures, and that's it. So should we pursue that? I would say definitely yes. If just the name or some concept or definition would stop us from pursuing what we would like to know about the past, that's not the way to go. Should we call it historical? No. Should we call it prehistorical? I also would argue no, because prehistoric already implies date, some dates or some time that before something happened, especially record. But we have a lot of cultures that are in parallel. One of them had the written sources, the other didn't, but they were contemporary. For example, Celtic culture and Roman culture, both of them of metal age, so we cannot call that it's something. So one is prehistory and the other is not. So therefore, in my sense, if I am interested more in Stone Age warfare, the warfare without the metal, which allowed the use of swords, what was warfare before the swords came into play, so I call it primal. That's more of an umbrella term for general Stone Age or actually Bone era. So I hope I shared some ideas that you found interesting, and I'd like you to subscribe and like this video and share it. So keep training. See you.